I still remember the exact moment my world flipped upside down. It was a warm Sunday morning, the kind where the lake on my ranch shimmered like glass and my kids were laughing on the dock while tossing breadcrumbs to the fish. That lake wasn't just water to me. It was the heart of our land, the soul of every memory I carried of my late father. He built that dock plank by plank with his own calloused hands. I grew up fishing beside him, listening to his quiet lessons about patience and respect. That lake was sacred. But little did I know, someone else, the HOA president, Karen, had plans to take it away from me in the most humiliating way possible. And it all started with a lie so bold it nearly broke me before I even had the chance to fight back. Karen was always a thorn in everyone's side, but she had a special hatred for me. I never bent to her rules, never played into her authority, and I think that burned her more than anything. She thrived on control, on making people bow to her, demands like she was queen of the neighborhood. But the ranch had always been different. My land wasn't part of the HOA. Still, that never stopped her from poking her nose in, making snide comments about my messy yard or how my tractor looked unsightly near the road. I ignored her for the most part until the day she stepped onto my property without warning. She smiled that smug smile of hers and told me she had exciting news. Her son Dylan was turning 25, and she had decided to give him ownership rights to the lake. Ownership rights to my lake. I laughed at first, thinking it was some ridiculous joke. But she held up a piece of paper like it was scripture, claiming the HOA had approved the transfer. I told her straight to her face, that lake belongs to me and my family. It always has. But Karen's smirk never faded. Not anymore, she said. It's been reassigned. That night, I sat on my porch long after everyone went to bed, staring out at the dark ripples of the water. My chest ached with a mixture of rage and fear. How could she think she could just give something that wasn't hers to give? How could anyone be so arrogant? My wife tried to calm me, reminding me we had the deed, the proof, the law on our side. But I couldn't shake the humiliation of her words. She wasn't just threatening my property. She was disrespecting my father's memory, my family's legacy. A few days later, the situation exploded. Dylan showed up at the lake with a group of his friends, acting like it was his personal playground. Loud music, beer cans, shouting, turning the quiet sanctuary into a circus. I walked down to confront him, keeping my voice steady, telling him he had no right to be there. He laughed in my face, just like his mother. Mom says, "This is mine now. Go back to your house, old man." That old man cut deeper than he knew. My fists clenched, but I walked away because I knew if I reacted then, I'd be giving them exactly what they wanted. The next morning, my truck tires were slashed. A few days after that, someone spray-painted HOA property across my dock. My kids started crying at night, asking me why Karen hated us so much. My wife asked if we should call the police, but something in me told me this wasn't about the police anymore. This was about war. The breaking point came one evening when I returned from town to find sheriff's cruisers parked by the ranch gate. Karen had called them, saying I was trespassing on the lake I'd owned my whole life. My own land, my own water. I stood there in front of those flashing red and blue lights, my jaw tight, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The deputies looked embarrassed as they questioned me, but they said they had to respond. Karen stood off to the side with her arms crossed, a wicked smile stretching across her face like she'd finally won. That was the moment I stopped being patient. That was the moment the humiliation burned itself into something sharper, something dangerous. What Karen didn't know was that her power wasn't as untouchable as she thought. The HOA, for all its barking and bullying, still ran on one thing: money. And guess who controlled where that money flowed? Who signed off on budgets, and who had the final say in approvals? Me, quietly, without her ever noticing. I'd been appointed to oversee allocations years ago when the HOA needed someone with financial expertise. Karen never paid attention because she assumed she ruled everything as the deputies finally left. I looked across the lake at Karen, still standing there with that smug expression. She thought she'd stripped me of my pride. She thought she'd stolen my family's heart. But she had no idea the storm she had just unleashed, and as the crickets sang in the growing night, I made a vow to myself. Karen and her son weren't just going to regret what they did. They were going to watch their entire little empire crumble, piece by piece, until all they had left was the bitter taste of their own arrogance. The days that followed were heavy with silence in my house. My wife Emily tried to keep the children calm, but I could see the worry written all over her face. My daughter Lily refused to go near the lake anymore, saying it didn't feel safe. My son Jacob asked me in the quiet of the night, "Dad, is Karen going to take our home too?" That question cut me deeper than anything Karen had ever done. I pulled him close and promised, with every ounce of conviction I had left, no one will ever take this home from us. But deep inside, I was already plotting how to turn Karen's arrogance into her downfall. Karen, however, wasn't finished, humiliating me. A week later, I watched from my porch as Dylan hosted another party at the lake. Trucks lined the dirt road, music blasted, and the once pristine dock was littered with beer bottles. My hands shook as I watched him dance on the dock like he owned it. Girls screaming with laughter, boys jumping into the water. He was desecrating the very place where my father used to kneel beside me, teaching me how to tie a fishing line. My fists clenched, but I didn't move. I just stood there, burning inside, because I knew something they didn't. That night, when the noise finally died down and Dylan's crew staggered away, I walked down to the dock. The smell of stale alcohol and cigarette smoke lingered in the air. I sat on the edge of the dock, dipping my hand into the water, and I whispered to the lake, "To my father, I swear, I'll make them pay." The stars above seemed to echo my vow, their reflection broken in the rippling water. The next morning, I pulled out the HOA's financial records. They had no idea how carefully I'd been watching. As budget overseer, I wasn't flashy or loud about my role, but every dollar that moved had my signature on it. And Karen, well, she was reckless with money. She pushed for endless landscaping projects, unnecessary surveillance cameras, and absurd beautification schemes. It was all about appearances for her, about showing off power she didn't really have. And the best part? She had no clue how fragile their budget actually was. I started small, quiet adjustments, tiny delays in funding her pet projects. A few bills unpaid until late notices arrived. HOA board members grumbled, but Karen brushed it off as clerical mistakes. I smiled in silence, because I knew the storm was just beginning. But Karen wasn't satisfied with her false claim to the lake. She wanted me broken. One morning, I woke to find a brand new sign hammered into the ground by the lake, "Private. Property trespassers will be prosecuted." The sign bore Dylan's name at the bottom. My blood boiled. Emily held me back from ripping it out right then and there. She whispered, "Patience. Let her dig her own grave. Patience." Word rang in my head all day. So I waited. And I kept pulling strings behind the curtain. 2 weeks later, the HOA held their monthly meeting in the community hall. I attended, as always, sitting in the back, quiet and observant. Karen stood at the front like she owned the world, boasting about the HOA's healthy finances and strong community projects. Her voice dripped with arrogance, her eyes darting to me with a mocking smile every chance she got. But then, when another board member asked why the funds for road repairs hadn't been allocated yet, Karen's smile faltered. She stuttered, glanced at her papers, and quickly changed the subject. I didn't say a word. Not yet. I just watched her squirm. That same night, I got my first taste of revenge. Dylan tried to throw another party at the lake, but the sheriff showed up this time not for me, but for him. Noise complaints had piled up from neighbors. Watching Dylan argue with the deputies, his face red with anger as they dispersed his friends, felt like the smallest crack in their armor, and cracks, when pushed hard enough, always split wide open. But then Karen struck again, harder. 2 days later, I came home to flashing police lights at the gate. This time, she had called the cops claiming I had assaulted Dylan when I told him to stay off my property. The accusation was false, of course, but for a moment. Standing there as deputies questioned me in front of my children, I felt the sting of humiliation stronger than ever. Emily's eyes were filled with tears as she clutched Lily to her side. Keith looked at me like they weren't sure what was happening, like they didn't know if their father was about to be taken away. When the deputies left, apologizing for Queeve, apologizing for the inconvenience, I sat in the living room in silence. My hands trembled with fury. Emily touched my shoulder and said quietly, "You can't keep letting her do this to us. You have the power. Use it." That was the night I stopped holding back. That was the night I opened the financial files completely, and I saw it Karen's fatal weakness. Had funneled HOA funds into personal expenses, garden renovations at her home, a new deck, even a vacation labeled as a community research trip. It was all there in black and white. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. This wasn't just about protecting my lake anymore. This was about exposing her for who she truly was. The lake shimmered outside the window, quiet, waiting. And I whispered into the dark, "It's time." The morning light spilled across the lake, calm and golden, as though the water itself was waiting for justice. I stood there with a cup of coffee, staring at the dock where Dylan had desecrated my father's memory with his drunken parties. My reflection on the surface looked hollow, worn from weeks of fighting, but behind my tired eyes, there was fire. I had what I needed now, proof, solid, undeniable proof that Karen wasn't just corrupt, she was a thief. That day, I began laying the groundwork. I didn't rush. I couldn't afford to. People like Karen thrived on drama, on noise, on forcing confrontations in front of crowds. But me? I knew real revenge was quiet, precise, and devastating when revealed at the right moment. I gathered copies of every document, every line item of the HOA's finances that tied back to her. Thousands of dollars misused. Vacations, landscaping. For her personal yard, even a bill for Dylan's brand new truck labeled as a community expense. Each page was a dagger, waiting to be driven into her empire. But even as I worked, she kept pressing her attacks. She wanted to grind me down before I could breathe. One afternoon, I caught Dylan spray painting "loser" across the side of my barn. When I confronted him, he smirked and muttered, "Better get used to it, old man. This whole place will be ours soon." His arrogance was a mirror of his mother's, a poisonous legacy passed from parent to child. My fists burned, but I swallowed the urge to lash out. Revenge was close. I couldn't jeopardize it now. Inside the house, Emily was growing restless. She hated watching me come home each night with more anger etched into my face. She worried about the kids, who jumped at every sound of tires on the gravel road, thinking it was Karen or Dylan coming again. "You have to end this, John," she said one night, her voice breaking. "I can't keep seeing them walk all over us. It's killing you, and it's tearing the kids apart." Her words cut through me, and I knew she was right. This wasn't just about a lake or a dock. This was about our family, about reclaiming dignity Karen thought she could steal. And I would end it by showing the world who Karen really was. The first crack appeared at the next HOA meeting. Karen stood at the front, boasting as usual, talking about a new community security initiative that would cost tens of thousands. But when the treasurer nervously mentioned that funds for road repairs were still unpaid, murmurs swept through the crowd. People were frustrated. They wanted answers. Karen brushed it off with her usual condescension, calling it a minor accounting delay. That's when I raised my hand. Every head turned toward me. Karen's eyes narrowed, her smile brittle. "Yes, John," she said, her tone mocking. I stood slowly, holding a thin folder of papers in my hand. "I was just wondering," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The accounting delay has anything to do with the HOA paying for a vacation in Florida last spring, listed as community research, or maybe the landscaping bill for your backyard that came straight out of HOA funds, or Dylan's truck marked as a maintenance vehicle." The room went silent. Karen's face drained of color. She stammered, tried to laugh it off, but the damage was done. People started whispering, looking at each other, and then back at her with suspicion. The foundation of her power, the belief that she was untouchable, had cracked. She recovered quickly, though snapping back with venom. "You don't know what you're talking about. Those are legitimate expenses." Her voice trembled, but she raised it higher, trying to drown out the murmurs. "You're just bitter because you lost your lake." Those words hit me like a punch, but I smiled. Because now the fight was out in the open, and the more she spoke, the deeper she dug her own grave. That night, Emily hugged me tighter than she had in weeks. "You finally hurt her," she whispered, but I shook my head. That was just the beginning. She hasn't felt pain yet, not the kind she deserves. And then came the moment that nearly shattered me. The next weekend, I woke up to find the dock engulfed in flames. Someone had doused it in gasoline and lit it during the night. By the time I got there, the fire had eaten through half of it, black smoke twisting into the sky. I grabbed the hose, fighting it back with everything I had, but the damage was irreversible. That dock built by my father's hands, polished by decades of memories, was gone. I collapsed to my knees, tears stinging my eyes as I stared at the charred remains. Lily stood behind me, clutching Jacob's hand, both of them silent, their faces pale with fear. Emily wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time, I let the grief take me. I cried not just for the wood and nails that were gone, but for the sense of peace that Karen had stolen. But as the ashes cooled, something inside me hardened. If Karen thought she had broken me, she was dead wrong. She had lit more than just my dock on fire. She had ignited something in me that could never be extinguished. I wiped my face, stood tall, and stared across the lake toward Karen's house in the distance. "You took my father's dock," I whispered, my voice shaking, but strong. "Now I'll take everything from you." And deep down, I knew I had the power to do it. The smell of burned wood lingered in the air for days, drifting through the windows of my home like a cruel reminder of what I had lost. Every time I walked past the lake, the sight of the charred dock twisted something deep inside me. But with that pain came clarity. I couldn't afford hesitation anymore. Karen thought she had destroyed me, but what she had really done was fuel the fire of revenge I had been carefully stoking. I spent nights at my desk, going over the financial records again and again, making sure every detail was airtight. I gathered copies, highlighted numbers, prepared statements, everything I would need to not just wound Karen, but utterly destroy her position in the community. The thing about tyrants like her was simple. Their power came from fear and illusion. Once the illusion cracked, once people saw the truth, the fear evaporated. And then there was nothing left. But even as I prepared, life at home was growing tense. Emily worried constantly. She hated the looks our kids gave her when the subject of the lake came up. Jacob asked me one night, Dad, can we ever go fishing again? His small voice carried the weight of generations, and I had to force the words out. Yes, son, we'll fish again. And when we do, it'll be on our lake, free from anyone's shadow. Saying it out loud wasn't just for him. It was a promise to myself. Karen, meanwhile, escalated her attacks. She seemed desperate now, trying harder to humiliate me in front of others. She started spreading rumors at HOA gatherings, whispering to neighbors that I was violent, unstable, even dangerous. One afternoon, I overheard 2 board members talking about me, their voices hushed with concern. For a moment, I felt the sting of isolation Karen's lies wrapping themselves around people I'd known for years. But then, I reminded myself, truth cuts deeper than gossip. The next HOA meeting arrived like a storm. The room was packed tighter than usual. Word had spread that something was brewing, though no one quite knew what. Karen strutted to the front, as always, her smile sharp and smug. Dylan sitting beside her with his arms crossed like a child playing at being a man. Before we begin, Karen said loudly, her voice echoing in the hall, I want to address the malicious lies being spread by a certain member of our community. Her eyes landed on me like daggers. These false accusations about financial misconduct are not only slanderous, they're dangerous. They undermine the very foundation of our HOA. She paused, letting the murmurs settle, then added, we all know John here has been struggling. He's bitter about losing his lake. And now, in his desperation, he's attacking me. Your elected president with baseless claims. For a moment, the room was quiet. Her words hung in the air like smoke. Then I stood, slowly, calmly. I walked to the front, past the rows of eyes, watching every step, and set a thick folder on the table beside her. These, I said, my voice steady, are not baseless claims. These are receipts. Every dollar you stole, every lie you told, every abuse of power you thought no one was watching. I flipped the folder open, holding up copies of invoices, bank transfers, emails. The room gasped as I read out loud. Landscaping at 124 Maple Drive, Karen's house, $15,000, charged to HOA funds. A vacation to Miami, $6,000, listed as research. Dylan's truck, $24,000, marked as a community vehicle. Karen's face turned pale, then blotchy red. Taken out of context, she stammered. But the crowd was no longer looking at me with doubt. They were looking at her with betrayal. You've stolen from every one of us, I said, my voice rising with anger I could no longer contain. You tried to take my lake. You tried to destroy my family. But this is who you really are. A liar, a thief, and the proof is right here. The murmurs turned to shouts. People stood, demanding explanations. The treasurer, wide-eyed, grabbed the papers from me and began flipping through them. These are real, he whispered, his face pale. Karen panicked. She raised her voice, screamed about conspiracies, about how I had doctored the documents. But it was too late. The illusion was shattered. I stood there, watching her unravel, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something heavy lift off my chest. This wasn't the end, no, far from it, but it was the beginning of her downfall. That night, Emily wrapped her arms around me as I sat on the porch staring at the lake. You did it, she whispered. You finally turned it back on her. But as the wind rippled across the water, I shook my head. Not yet. She's desperate now. Desperate people do dangerous things. This isn't over, Emily, not until she's stripped of everything. And I meant every word. Because while Karen was flailing in the public eye, I still held the one weapon she hadn't seen coming. I controlled their budget. Every cent, every approval, every future project depended on me. and I was going to use that power to grind her empire to dust. The days after the meeting were electric with tension. Neighbors who once walked past my ranch with wary eyes now stopped at the gate to shake my hand, whispering words of support. Karen's voice, once booming with authority at every gathering, had become a desperate shriek. She sent out long-winded emails to the community, calling me a liar, a manipulator, claiming that I forged the documents, but people weren't buying it anymore. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew quickly into full-blown distrust. Karen's carefully built facade was cracking, and I could see it every time she drove past my property. She wouldn't make eye contact anymore. Her SUV moved. A little faster, her face flushed with anger when she caught sight of me on the porch. Dylan, on the other hand, doubled down on arrogance. He started parking his truck right at the edge of my property, music blasting as if daring me to confront. He wanted a fight, and every time I walked away, it burned him more than it burned me. At home, the air was different. Emily seemed lighter, her shoulders not as tense, her voice not as weary. The kids started laughing again, though quietly, like they still feared Karen's shadow lingering over the lake. When Jacob asked if we could rebuild the dock, my throat tightened. We will, I promised. But not until this is over. Not until we make sure no one can ever touch it again. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat at my desk staring at the financial files again. The HOA was bleeding money. Every unnecessary project Karen had pushed was draining them dry. And now that I held the purse strings, I could cut them off completely. Street repairs, denied. Landscaping upgrades, postponed indefinitely. Security cameras, rejected. Every time Karen tried to push something through, she hit a wall. The complaints from homeowners started pouring in. Roads filled with potholes, streetlights flickered out, sidewalks crumbled. People grew restless, demanding answers. And all the blame fell squarely on Karen. She stood at the center of the storm, trying to explain why nothing was getting done, while I sat quietly in the back of every meeting, watching her drown in her own lies. Then came the boiling point. A special session was called to address the financial mismanagement. Karen arrived, red-faced and frantic, clutching papers, trying to spin the story that I was sabotaging the HOA. "He's holding your money hostage," she screamed, pointing at me. But before she could finish, the treasurer interrupted her with a stack of documents I had discreetly provided him. He laid them out for everyone to see. The unpaid bills, the wasted funds, the personal expenses Karen had hidden. The room erupted. People shouted over one another, demanding her resignation. Some yelled for legal action. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to shout them down, but her words were swallowed by the noise. Dylan stood up, shouting at the crowd to show respect for his mother, but that only made things worse. Someone shouted back, "Respect? She stole from us." I sat in the corner, silent, watching the empire she built collapse around her. It wasn't loud revenge. It wasn't fiery or explosive. It was slow, deliberate, and devastating. It's a kind of revenge that left scars long after the smoke cleared. But Karen wasn't finished, not yet. Later that night, just as Emily and I were putting the kids to bed, headlights swept across the house. Dylan's truck. He stormed up to the porch, pounding on the door, his voice slurred from drink. "You ruined her," he shouted. "You think you're some kind of hero, old man? You're nothing. That lake is mine." Emily pulled the kids upstairs while I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. Dylan staggered closer, his fists clenched, spit flying from his mouth as he cursed me. I didn't flinch. I just looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Your mother did this to herself, and if you don't back off, you'll go down with her." For a moment, his rage faltered. His bravado slipped. He muttered something I couldn't catch, then stormed back to his truck, tires screaming as he tore down the road. I stood there under the stars, my heart pounding, knowing the war wasn't over. Not yet inside, Emily touched my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "He's dangerous, John," she whispered. "He's just like her. He'll do anything to protect her pride." And I knew she was right. Karen had lost control, and Dylan was her weapon now. But what neither of them realized was that I hadn't even played my final card, because it wasn't enough to embarrass Karen in front of her neighbors. It wasn't enough to take away her credibility. I wanted her to feel the weight of every dollar she had stolen, every lie she had told. I wanted her to face consequences she couldn't talk her way out of. And I knew exactly how to make it happen. The morning after Dylan's drunken outburst, I sat at the kitchen table staring at a stack of files that felt heavier than stone. Emily poured me coffee, but didn't speak. She didn't need to. The worry in her eyes said everything. She wanted this over, wanted peace again, wanted her children to feel safe in their own home. I wanted that too. But peace wasn't earned by stepping back now. It was earned by finishing what I'd started. For weeks, I had been building the case quietly, not just against Karen, but against the HOA board itself. I had every receipt, every email, every signature tying Karen to her misuse of funds. But this time, I wasn't going to stop at public embarrassment. I was going to hand it all over to people who couldn't be manipulated or silenced. The county auditor, the state attorney, real authorities who had the power to end Karen's reign permanently. I made copies of everything, sealing them in neat folders. Each sheet of paper was a nail in Karen's coffin. Emily watched me in silence, finally whispering, "Once you send those, there's no turning back." I met her eyes. I don't want to turn back. Later that afternoon, I walked into the county office with the folders tucked under my arm. The receptionist looked up, and when I told her I was there to file a financial complaint against the HOA, her expression shifted from polite to sharp. She led me to a back office where an investigator listened carefully as I laid everything out. When I spread the papers across his desk, his eyebrows rose higher and higher. By the time I was done, he leaned back in his chair and said, "This is serious, very serious. We'll be looking into this immediately." For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. Justice wasn't just a dream, now it was in motion. But Karen, desperate and flailing, wasn't about to go down quietly. The very next day, a notice was taped to my gate, a cease and desist from the HOA, claiming I was harassing members and spreading false information. I ripped it down without hesitation, tossing it into the dirt. She was scrambling, throwing whatever she could to keep herself afloat. But the tide had already turned. That evening, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Word spread fast, and nearly the entire neighborhood packed the hall. Karen stormed in late, her hair disheveled, her face red with fury. She carried a thick binder of papers, slamming it onto the table as if it would erase what I'd already done. Dylan trailed behind her, glaring at me from across the room. "Neighbors," Karen shouted, her voice cracking with desperation, "you're being lied to. John is manipulating the budget, twisting numbers, making me look like a criminal, when all I've ever done is serve this community." The crowd was restless, muttering, shifting uneasily in their chairs. But then the treasurer stood, holding up a letter he had received that morning. "This isn't just John anymore," he said firmly. "The county is investigating. There's an official inquiry into our finances. We can't ignore this." Karen froze, her mouth opened, but no words came. The crowd erupted shouts of anger, demands for her resignation, threats of lawsuits. Dylan jumped up, yelling at everyone to shut up, but the noise drowned him out. For the first time, Karen looked small, powerless. I stayed quiet in the back, watching her empire collapse piece by piece. It was everything I had hoped for, but I wasn't celebrating yet. I knew people like Karen cornered animals were the most dangerous, and she still had one weapon left, her son. That night, just as the house grew quiet and the kids drifted to sleep, headlights swept across the ranch again. Dylan's truck. My chest tightened. I stepped out onto the porch, my shotgun resting against the doorframe not to use. But as a warning, Dylan staggered out, his face twisted with rage. "You ruined her life," he screamed, his voice breaking. In the night air, you think you're some kind of hero, but you destroyed everything we had. He took a step closer, fists shaking. "You don't deserve that lake. You don't deserve this land." I raised my hand, calm but firm. "Go home, Dylan. This isn't your fight anymore. Your mother made her choices. Now she's paying for them." He stopped, chest heaving, tears burning in his eyes. For a moment, I almost saw the scared boy beneath the arrogance, the child clinging to a mother who had poisoned him with her pride. But then his face hardened again, and he spat into the sick dirt. "This isn't over," he growled before storming back to his truck. The engine roared to life, and he sped off into the night. I stood there under the stars, my hands trembling slightly, knowing he meant it. This wasn't over. Not yet, but as I turned back toward the lake, I felt something shift inside me. Karen's grip was broken. The investigation was underway. The community had turned against her. The fire she lit had taken everything from me once, but now it was lighting the path to her destruction. And I knew one thing for certain. By the time this was done, she wouldn't just lose her title. She would lose everything she had ever tried to take from me. The night after the town meeting, I barely slept. Every word, every gasp, every angry face replayed in my mind. Karen's world had collapsed in front of everyone, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a strange calm settle inside me. For months, I had carried a weight that seemed unbearable. She had taken so much my peace, my dignity, my family's legacy, but in that moment, I knew the tables had finally turned. What she built on arrogance and manipulation was now nothing but ruins. But peace did not come instantly. The very next morning, as I sipped my coffee on the porch overlooking my lake, a sound broke the silence. It was her voice, shrill and desperate, echoing down the road. Karen was outside my property, yelling at the top of her lungs, "You ruined my life. You destroyed my son's future." Her words carried rage, but also a hollow weakness. I stepped outside, calm as ever, and looked her straight in the eye. For the first time, I saw fear where there used to be pride. She wasn't the queen of the HOA anymore. She was just a bitter woman clinging to ashes. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. I simply said, "You brought this on yourself. You thought you could gift away something that was never yours. You thought you could break me, but you forgot was always stronger." My words hit her harder than any fine, any loss of money. She stood frozen, trembling, before finally retreating to her car. Watching her drive off with defeat painted across her face was the closure I had been waiting for in the weeks that followed. Justice unfolded like a slow, steady storm. Karen's son, the one she had gifted my lake to, faced lawsuits and debts, from failed business deals tied to the land he thought he owned. Without the HOA funds Karen once controlled, he had no lifeline. The mansion she flaunted, the luxury cars she boasted about tall, gone piece by piece. Neighbors who once bowed to her turned their backs. People who feared her now mocked her downfall. She had ruled with iron fists, but now she lived in silence, isolated and humiliated. As for me, life returned to something I hadn't felt in years peaceful. I walked around my ranch lake every evening, the sun dipping low and painting the water in gold. The sound of the breeze moving through the trees was no longer tainted by HOA demands or Karen's threats. My ranch was whole again. My family's legacy was safe. And I finally felt proud, not just because I won against her, but because I didn't. Let her break me. One evening, my daughter stood with me by the lake. She was quiet for a long time before saying softly, "Dad, I'm proud of you. You didn't just fight for the land. You fought for us." Her words brought tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but from healing. That was the moment I knew that battle was worth every sleepless night, every tear, every ounce of strength I had to summon. Months later, I heard Karen had moved out of the neighborhood. No goodbye party, no farewell gifts, no parade of admirers. She left quietly, her empire of control reduced to dust. And as strange as it may sound, I didn't feel joy in her suffering. I felt relief. Relief that it was over. Relief that justice, in its truest form, had been served. Standing by my lake one last time before winter set in, I whispered into the wind, "This land will never be taken again. Not while I'm alive." And for the first time in years, I let myself smile, knowing that my family's future was safe and Karen well. Karen would never forget the day she crossed the wrong man, the day she called cops on me for a lake. That was never hers to give, the day she learned the hard way that I controlled her budget and her downfall.